Let's talk sweet, heartwarming reads today. If you've been here a while, you probably know that I read quite a lot of heavy books, books that are quite traumatic to read. And so here is a bit of light relief, perfect if you're looking for a beach read that has meaning and is poignant, but is also not going to have you crying at the beach. Hi, I'm Steffi from Books That Teach Us. I read books and I share their key learnings with you. Before we get started today, a word from our sponsor, my Mapped by Books map and tracker. Welcome to Mapped by Books, a unique and fun way to track your global reading, all made by me. If we come over here, we have our blank map to start with. When you click on my books, you will find your reading log. So we can fill in the country. I just read a book set in Australia. I can track book title here, the author. I can add a date finished, and I can add a rating over here too. The coolest thing that happens then is that we go back to my reading map. You will see that Australia is coloured in and that it's logged here as countries read and percentage of the world's complete. It's perfect for people who love global reading and trying to read more books from different countries set all around the world. Okay, my first book I'm going to start with, I believe I came across because I think it was in the Richard and Judy book club, and it's called Away with the Penguins by Hazel Pryor. This was just such a sweet, heartwarming book. It is about a very grumpy older lady. She's got quite a lot of money, no family that we know of, and is often quite rude to the people in her life. She comes across as mean and tight with her money. And she watches this documentary on TV about penguins. She decides, I've got all this money, I'm going to think about leaving it to these penguins. But first I need to check out what they're actually doing, what they might actually do with the money. So she flies to Antarctica and basically inserts herself into the researchers in Antarctica to find out if they deserve her wealth, that she might leave them in her will after she dies. It is very silly. It's very sweet. There's obviously this learning journey that this grumpy old woman goes on, and we realize actually she's not so grumpy in the end. And we find out a bit of a twist that happens as well. And one of the reasons I think this book is so great, and I want to share with you guys, because I know you love reading books around the world, this is set in Antarctica. So you can tick this off your continent and country of Antarctica list. It's perfect if you have my Mapped by Books tracker, because you can then, it will colour in the whole of the bottom of Antarctica for you. So that's a really good win. It didn't take me very long to read this book, so I feel like it's a short, nice read that you can read when you want a light-hearted story about love and life and finding sweetness in unexpected places. Okay, I've got two on my list by the author Leanne Moriarty, and I came across her when I watched for the first time actually Big Little Lies, which was definitely not that lighthearted. And I also read 9 Perfect Strangers, which I just found quite odd. But these two books are definitely my favourites, and this one and the next one I'm going to talk about, because they are really like heartwarming, and they make you warm inside, and they make you want to be a better person and think about things a little bit differently, think about your own life a little bit differently. So I think they're really special in terms of that. So this is a spoiler-free book review, of course, but what Alice forgot is basically right at the beginning of the story, we meet the character of Alice, and she falls in the gym and she bangs her head and she forgets the last 10 years of her life, including her own children, her own divorce from the man that she loves, and the whole story like unravels from there. It's equal parts funny, a bit disconcerting, and just really quite poignant about those things where people wake up in real life and realize, I don't know what happened to the last 10 years, and have I even been a good person? What have I done? Anything that people regret and where things have gone wrong. It really makes you think about that, because she's obviously the same person as 10 years ago, but the Alice that people know in the story is not the same. And she can't quite put those two versions of herself together. And it's really, really eye-opening to how we change, how we can change for the worse if we let life get to us. There are a couple of sadder things that happen in the stories about miscarriages, so just a little trigger warning there. And then you do spend the whole book thinking, is she ever going to get her memory back? And like, maybe it would be better if she didn't get her memory back. And I definitely recommend it. If you've read it, let me know in the comments. Okay, I think this one is my absolute favorite Leanne Moriarty book, called Here One Moment. And I really enjoyed this book. I actually read this book when I was on holiday in Koh Tao in Thailand with my sister and our partners. And basically, at the beginning of the story, it's set on an aeroplane, and there's an older lady on the plane called Cherry, and she has this moment on the aeroplane, and she walks down the aisle, and she goes around telling people the day that they're going to die and what they're going to die of. And the rest of the book is everything that happens to the people that were on the plane and they heard about her predictions about their death day. And it is so funny in places. It's actually really sweet and touching in places. There's a lot of different chapters by different characters that were sitting on the plane that day, and the way that what she did affected them or didn't affect them. When this isn't a spoiler, but the first thing that she tells comes true. So the person does die on that day of what she said. And then suddenly it's like kind of all the characters realizing, oh my gosh, could this ever be true? Could this woman have known this? And really those things of like fate and free will. Like if she said to you, oh, you're going to die in a car accident, were people not going to drive? Were they going to be more careful drivers as a result of that? Fits that she'd have told them that. If she told you there was a medical problem, were you going to get more regular checks about things? Were you going to do a yearly health checkup? And it really opens your eyes to, yeah, we all have a time limit and it's awful. And what are we going to do about it? Are there things that we could do to try and make ourselves healthier, make our lives better? And it's really poignant and quite thought-provoking in that way. A lot about like, do we carry around this fear of dying? Or should we just embrace life? Does it make us embrace life more? Because we all know that we have a limited time on Earth. And it just was really, really thought-provoking. Sherry herself, the older lady you hear from, and these certain flashbacks from her life. There are some storylines of grief within the story as well. And overall, I think it's like a perfect beach read. I would put this as number one thing to read this summer. Okay, my next one is Elif Shafak's 40 Rules of Love. And I couldn't actually believe this was Elif Shafak after I've read her other books. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. Because her other books, like The Bastard of Istanbul, Honor, are really like hard-hitting, big, heavy topics. And this one was so totally different. It was like such light relief. And this book has two storylines within it. One of them is set in the 1100s, and it follows the life of Shams and Rumi. And Rumi was one of the greatest poets of our time. He shared a lot of things about Islam that went against how people perceive Islam or perceived it then. I learned some things about whirling dervishes, which are super cool. And it's all set in what is now present day Turkey, in the more ancient world. And it's about a friendship between two men there. We then have a current day storyline of a very bored stay-at-home mum who doesn't know kind of what to do with her life. She's deeply unhappy in her marriage and her situation. And she starts up an email pen pal friendship with a man who's actually studying Shams and Rumi. And so that's where we get the flashbacks to the earlier time frame. And I learned a lot about like how Islam could have been in the past, and very more open-minded liberal understandings of Islamic scripture. I loved all the parts about Rumi because I think some of the words that he says are just so beautiful. You'll often see them on things like Pinterest and attributed to Rumi, whether correctly or not, I don't know. And it was just really like I learned a lot, but it wasn't traumatic in any way. It was fun and interesting and well paced and such a random like mishmash of kind of like things in current day to then things set in the 1100s. And I just really enjoyed it. And it's also a great one for ticking off Turkey on your world map of reading around the world. So I recommend that one for that too. Okay, my next one is a little bit different to the others I've mentioned, and I've gone for Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Now, I've read this book a couple of times, and both times I really enjoyed it. It is very funny. There are some disturbing bits in it, but I think it's a perfect, heartwarming read because of the journey that Eleanor herself goes on. So it's all set in Glasgow in Scotland, and we meet this character of Eleanor, and she's very, very unusual and strange. When you're reading it, you're thinking, okay, she must be quite neurodivergent, and she doesn't know how to get along with people at work. She's really lacking in social skills. We quite quickly learn that she potentially has a drinking problem. That's all she does all weekend is get so drunk and then flat out and then just goes back into work again. She has no joy or pleasure in her life. And we don't know that much about her. We know that she has some phone calls with her mum who seems really horrible to her. And so we start to understand, okay, there's some kind of like psychology going on with Eleanor. And then she befriends the IT guy at work, and it's kind of about their burgeoning friendship. And it is just so sweet. It's like there's some like twisty turns in it as well that really keep you reading and keep you engaged. So I would say it's not as like fluffy as some of the other books I've mentioned, but it is just, I think, a lovely read. So let me know if you've read it below. I'd be really curious. There are some parts where I don't want to do any spoilers, but she references some of the things that have happened in her childhood, and that perhaps that's why she's drinking heavily. So it is not as like light and fluffy. Just a warning about that without giving away any spoilers. My next one, I've gone for a non-fiction book actually, and I've gone for Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I think this book does not get enough recognition because loads of people talk about the film, and honestly, I think the film is so bad. And the book is actually so important, and this journey of a woman going from her depression to finding her happiness again. And it actually taught me a lot about what it could be like to be depressed. I consider myself lucky. I've never dealt with depression before. And I think this really helped me to understand how someone might be feeling if they have depression. And there's really quite sad parts at the beginning where her relationships are breaking down. She feels no pleasure in life anymore. She used to love food and she's stopped enjoying food. She's lost all this weight. She's just this deeply unhappy woman that she was in real life, Elizabeth Gilbert. And she is already a writer. Her publishing house agreed that she will go on a 9-month trip and spend 3 months eating in Italy, praying in India in an ashram, and then she falls in love in Bali. And I'm really a big Elizabeth Gilbert fan. I don't want to give any spoilers about it, but there's a lot that has happened in her life since she wrote this book, and lots more of it quite heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. And I think this is a really good travel read. So I think it's great if you're kind of going on holiday, but it's also just that thing of how we can turn our lives around, how we can get inspiration to be better, do better, be a better person, and just start to like find her joy again. Like she's so happy when she's in Italy and starting to put on more weight, and she can actually enjoy the food. If any of you have been to Italy, you will know the food is one of the most amazing things there. And so yeah, you really see this starting to grasp that joy again. Okay, this time I've gone for, and it's maybe not quite as like heartwarming. I don't know, you can argue with me about it in the comments, but I've gone for Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens because I love this book for all the nature themes that it had, all the things about the marshes and living in the swamps. And I just felt it was very, just very human orientated. Having said that, there's obviously some things that happen in this book that are not light and fluffy, but I did feel like it was meaningful. We have the protagonist go on this learning curve. I think it's quite interesting because I've seen a lot of people say they were disappointed by this book, but I think they listened to a lot of hype. I actually didn't know any of the hype about this book. I found it in the bookshop when I was at the airport, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And I think my friend had recommended it for the nature. I think it's lovely when a character is like learning to read in a book. It feels so like meta somehow. And the kind of support that the character of Kaya goes through. There's some great twists in this book that I did not see coming. So I feel like it's like fast paced enough to be like a fun read to take on holiday. Okay, my next book, I've always got a global theme. You guys should know that by now. We are going to Japan for Sweet Bean Paste by Jurian Sugagawa. I learned a lot about this book, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I learned a lot about a very specific medical condition from this book. So this book is mainly about friendship. It's very sweet. I wouldn't say it's a fast-paced book like some of the others on the list. It like rolls along in a lovely way. So it's about a younger woman who runs a dorayaki shop, which is a type of food, and she befriends an older woman who teaches her how to make this sweet bean paste and kind of turns around the trajectory of the shop and improves their lives. And it's about their friendship, they're learning about each other, and then about the older woman's past that starts to be revealed through the story. It's also got such a lovely book cover as well. I was very sad when I had to return it back to the library. It didn't make me cry, but there are some sadder bits in it. So if you're just after pure fluffiness, don't read this one. But I just thought it's really, really lovely and sweet. And I always think it's interesting reading books set in Japan. I've actually got a whole list that I'm going to do soon for that. So subscribe if you're interested in that in the future. Okay, my next one. Again, people might argue that it's not very light-hearted, but I loved it. And I feel like it's definitely appropriate for like an emotional, heartwarming list. And that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I'd heard a lot about this book, so I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I'd had quite a few people recommend it to me. I do follow Matt Haig on social media, so I'm aware that he is very focused about mental health. And this book was just so lovely. As some of you might know, I love it when it's like the possible lives that people could have led. I'm going to do a whole playlist on this coming soon. Subscribe for that. And that's exactly what happens in The Midnight Library. So this is spoiler free. Right at the beginning, the main character is trying to kill herself. And then within her subconscious, she goes into this library and she can select a book. And each book that she opens is one of the lives that she could have led if she'd made different decisions. So one of them would be, okay, if she had studied this at university and gone on to become a scientist. One of these was if she hadn't broken up with this boyfriend and what would have happened then. One of these, if she dated this person and everything that would have happened then. And I just love the idea of all those like missed things that could have been. And I think it's really inspiring for like life now. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're making all these decisions. Maybe there's a version of me somewhere doing other versions of these decisions that I'm making. And I really love this book. I really recommend it. I've recommended it to a lot of my students, like older teenagers, to read. It is obviously based around a very serious topic of suicide, and I think it deals with it in such a warm and respectful way. My next one was one of my favorite childhood books. This is a young adult book that I still enjoy rereading as an adult, and it is Journey to the River Sea by Eva Ibbotson. It starts off with Maya, who is an orphan in an orphanage in England, and the lawyers found some family that she belongs to, and she's being sent to live with them. And she's very excited, and all her classmates are excited because it's in the Amazon, and they've been studying all these things about the animals and the nature in the Amazon. And so off she goes to live with this family in Brazil. And it's a lot about colonial attitudes to where they are living. So the family that she has there, like an uncle and aunt and cousins, are living as if it's like Little England, but in Brazil. So they will not eat any produce from Brazil. They will not learn any of the languages there. They will not venture out into the Amazon. Like, they live this pristine, sterile life. And I think it's one of the books that gave me like a sense of adventure, because Maya arrives there. They're not very nice to her. They only wanted her to come there for the money. This is not a spoiler. It happens very early on. And she's there and she wants this big adventure in the Amazon. And she eventually meets with a governess, and their kind of unlikely friendship starts. And it's just such a fun read. We learn a little bit more about the indigenous people who are living in the Amazon there. And it's just like a really fun, sweet read that just makes you want to go on an adventure. Okay, this next one I really enjoyed. It's so much fun, and I learned quite a lot about history from it. It is The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out of the Window and Ran Away. No, Climbed Out of the Window and Disappeared by Jonas Jonasson. This is all based in Sweden at the beginning of the story, and it's an old man who is 100 on his 100th birthday. He climbs out of the window and he gets involved in all these like crazy, ridiculous storylines. But what we actually get is a load of flashbacks to his life that he's lived. And it's like the last 100 years of all these world events. And the story places him at the center of all these insane world events. So he's there with the rise of dictators and revolutionaries, at the time of the nuclear bomb being designed, at the time of royalty being crowned, at the time of people going to space. Like, he's suddenly involved in all these major world events. And so we keep seeing that as flashbacks. And actually, I learned quite a lot. So it's very ridiculous, but it's really fun. And you learn quite a lot about world history in the last 100 years of history. So that was definitely an added bonus. Okay, my next one is also very comedic. It is Salmon Fishing in the Yemen by Paul Torday. Now, I first actually watched the film of this, which stars Emily Blunt and Ewan McGregor, and really enjoyed it. And then I came across the book, and the book is so funny. Like, so many laugh out loud moments. And it's one of those things where it's unusual narration. So all of it is told through emails, interviews in a police station, like texts and memos. And I'm actually going to include it on a playlist coming soon for like non-traditional narration. And basically it is all about a scientist who is in charge of fisheries, and the British government asked him to become involved in a crazy scheme to bring salmon to the Yemen. Now, you'd have to know some stuff about salmon, but salmon generally are in very cold waters. They return to their home all the time. So he thinks this is absolutely insane. But there's a very rich Yemeni sheikh who is going to pay for this. And then a woman called Harriet, who is British and works for the sheikh. And she's trying to help him to bring this project to life. And she says he's a visionary and he likes to try and do things that have never been done before. So it's all about this like insane plan to bring salmon into the Yemen where they are not native. And it is just really funny. There's some really sweet parts in it. It's quite different to the film in terms of some of the love interests that happened there. And I just love the way it's like you really have to infer things. And I feel like it's maybe quite a British sense of humour in some of the parts of it. And I loved all the bits with like all the like British bureaucracy and all the memos, and then people basically wanting to say no in emails, but trying to find other diplomatic ways to say no, or being really pissed off in emails, and like how the British non-direct way of that coming across. Like, I just think it's really funny. Let me know if you've read it. It's also a good one for if you're doing any kind of alphabet ticking off of countries. Why for Yemen? This is a good book for that. Okay. My next one, I've gone for a little more like mystical one, and it is The Night Tiger. By Yang Chu. Sorry, I don't think I'm pronouncing her first name correctly. And it is all set in Malaysia, about 100 years or so ago, so during colonial times. And it's a little bit of like magical realism, a lot about nature and curious, weird things happening with wildlife. And there's like this big quest that happens on it. We have a few different characters. So we have the white colonial doctors that are there. We follow a young girl, Malaysian girl, of Chinese descent growing up and her experiences. There's a very weird stepsister, stepbrother situation in this. So if that's going to disturb you, don't read this. And these mythological mergings of like men potentially turning into tigers and people being killed by tigers, and whether that's actually a were-tiger, like a werewolf, and actually normally a man in the day. And so it just throws up all these, like, I love things when it merges myths in or not. I wouldn't say it's totally heartwarming. I would say some parts of this are rambling, but I just think it's quite a fun holiday read. So I would recommend this. We actually read this to my book club and there were a lot of mixed opinions on it, but I really enjoyed it. And my next one I'm going to talk about is Yellow Face by Rebecca F. Kwang. This is probably one of the really talked about book that I read way too late. And again, I think it's a great one for like being, maybe it's not heartwarming, no, but it's quite like meaningful. So, and it's actually quite funny. So, and it's just very clever as well. So basically, at the beginning of the story, there are two frenemies and they're both authors. And at the beginning of the story, one of them dies, leaving an unpublished manuscript. And the other woman, who is supposed to be her friend, then takes the manuscript and pretends she published it herself. And the woman who died is actually Asian. And the book that she's written connects with a lot of Asian Americans, with her audience there. And so lots of people can't quite understand like how this white woman is then producing a work such as this. And it, like, with the research that should have had to go into it and the knowledge of certain cultures. And it's just very eye-opening. It's quite dark. And it's one of those books where actually none of the characters are likable. You do not like any of the characters, but it is such a good book and you can't put it down. And I read it really fast, maybe over 2 days, I think. And just one of those things where like, you're waiting for the downfall of one of the characters because you're like, oh, you're just the worst. So you want to keep reading because you want to find out if like there's ever going to be any comeuppance for what she did. And it also throws up a lot of questions about race, about who gets to tell stories, about when we're telling other people's stories, about how lots of people are very morally ambiguous. They certainly are in this novel, and about how is it ever right for authors to take events from other people's lives in order to tell their own stories. I feel like that's one of the like bigger, deeper questions that comes out of this book. I have got a free quiz to help you find your next read. You can take it with the QR code here or in the link below. If you got to the end, thank you for listening.